It's okay. I brought you something to eat. Don't be afraid. It's okay, little guy. This will help you heal.
Can you believe it? A man who lost his daughter would risk his life to save a wounded baby Bigfoot? This is not a movie. This is a diary kept hidden for 30 years in Montana. In 1992, in a quiet Montana town, a grieving father named Mark Avery stumbled upon a wounded baby Bigfoot trembling by the riverbank, the same river where his daughter had slipped away forever. And in that moment, he didn't see a monster. He saw her, crying for help. He named the creature Buddy, and every morning he returned with water, food, stories, and a heart slowly learning how to feel again. But Buddy's injury wasn't an accident. It was a trap. And when the hunters came, it wasn't just a rescue. It became a war between fear and compassion. Mark chose to protect what others called a myth, and in return, he met the eyes of a mother Bigfoot who thanked him, not with words, but with a hand pressed gently over his heart. This isn't fiction. It's a story preserved through hidden photographs and memories locked away for 30 years. If you stay with us, you'll discover why Mark buried the truth and the message Buddy left behind, carved on a single flat stone by the river. Before we dive deeper, may I ask, where in the world are you watching from right now? And what's your name, dear friend? Because stories like this, they deserve to be heard far and wide. And maybe, just maybe, you'll help it reach someone who still believes in magic. If this touched you, give it a like, subscribe, and join our growing family of Bigfoot believers. Together, we're not just sharing legends. We're keeping something beautiful alive. The fog moved like breath over the Clark Fork River, thick and slow and sacred, as if the earth itself didn't want to be seen yet. Trees stood silent, bare-shouldered, and waiting. Somewhere nearby, a jay called once, sharp and lonely, before everything went quiet again. The world was holding something. Mark Avery could feel it. That hush, that pause, that terrible stillness before something chooses to make itself known. He stepped carefully over slick stones near the riverbank, camera slung around his neck, boots leaving temporary scars in the mud. 42, with the weight of at least 60 in his shoulders, he moved like a man who didn't expect to be seen, or maybe didn't want to be. Mark had woken early, as usual. He couldn't sleep much since that winter 2 years ago. Dreams kept coming in broken flashes. Ice, screams, that slow crack of something giving way beneath your feet. Some mornings he walked until his legs burned. Other mornings, like this one, he carried his Nikon and tried to convince himself that chasing light was enough to keep memory at bay. He raised the lens, adjusted focus. The river ran dark and sluggish beneath the fog. Cold light was just beginning to smear the water with silver. Behind the viewfinder, the world looked cleaner, manageable. You could frame it, control it. Click, proof it ever happened. Then he heard it. A sound he hadn't expected. Not a bird, not wind. A sound too soft to be a scream, too human to be dismissed. A whimper. His finger froze on the shutter. Another whimper, ragged, weak, like a wounded fawn. He lowered the camera and scanned the tree line across the river, heart beginning to beat in strange places. For a moment, nothing moved. Then, something did. On the far bank, tangled in brush and half hidden behind a downed log, was a shape. Small, hunched, breathing. He stepped forward, squinting through the mist. Whatever it wasn't running. It wasn't hiding. It was trembling. At first he thought it was a child. Then the mist thinned for a breath, and he saw the fur, the limbs, the unmistakable wrongness of something not meant to be here. It was covered in coarse brown hair, matted and wet at the legs. Its frame was too thick for a human child, And yet, the way it held itself, curled in pain, arms wrapped tight around its knees, face pressed down, breathing quick and shallow. Its foot, bloody and swollen, was caught in a twisted angle, red seeping down into the moss. A cry slipped again from its throat, barely a sound, and yet it shattered something inside him. He stood frozen. His mind reeled with choices. Run. Take the photo. Call the sheriff. Don't move. Don't breathe. But none of those thoughts felt real. Only the sight of that thing, that child or creature or miracle, was real. He raised his camera out of instinct. Click. The shutter snapped once, soft but sharp. The figure flinched. Mark stepped back, ashamed. What was he doing? Photographing a suffering creature like it was a trophy. He looked at the image in the viewfinder. Blurry. Impersonal. Wrong. No. He lowered the camera, heart thudding. Slowly, deliberately, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the protein bar he always carried but rarely ate. His fingers moved without thinking. He peeled the wrapper halfway, knelt low on the edge of the river, and stretched his arm out toward the water. "I won't hurt you," he whispered, though he knew words didn't matter now. It was the quiet in his hands that would decide everything. The creature didn't move at first, just watched him. Eyes wide, glossy, and full of something ancient. Fear, yes, but something else too. Like it had seen kindness before, and now didn't quite believe in it anymore. Then it sniffed. A slow shift. One hand released from its knee, hesitated, moved forward an inch. Then another. Mark didn't breathe. Its hand, small, padded, with fingers like thick twigs, touched the bar, snatched it, pulled back. It sniffed again, bit once, chewed. A second passed. Then its eyes lifted, just barely, to meet his. And in that look, something fragile passed between them. Recognition, not of who, but of why. It was starving. It was scared. It was alone. And it was someone's child. Mark blinked hard, as if that truth could be unseen. He stepped cautiously toward the edge of the water, trying to judge how deep the current was at this point, how he might cross without startling. A sound split the silence. Low, deep, impossible. A single bellow rolled out from somewhere far into the trees, so low it rumbled in Mark's chest. A sound not meant for humans. A sound that made the small creature's ears twitch violently, its head snap up, its body go rigid. Then silence. Mark turned toward the woods, breath caught. Nothing. No shape, no movement. But something had called. The creature was already backing away, bar still clutched in its hand, eyes wide again with panic. Its tiny chest rose and fell like it was being chased already. Mark didn't move. He held up both hands slowly. "It's okay." But the creature was gone, limping fast through the underbrush, vanishing into the trees like a shadow that never wanted to be caught again. Mark stood there, alone again by the river, one foot still half raised as if trying to follow. But he didn't. He couldn't. His hands trembled. And just for a moment, the fog seemed to thicken again around him, like the forest wanted to erase what had just happened. The camera at his side clicked softly against his belt. He didn't raise it. Instead, his mind slipped, as it often did, back to another day. A colder day, a darker one. The sound of cracking ice. The white lake. The scream. The terrible moment his daughter's hand slipped through his, swallowed by the frozen world before he could hold on. He had run then. Run and screamed and begged the sky to give her back. But she was gone. And now here he was again, standing on the edge of something unspeakable, watching another child vanish into the trees. Only this time he hadn't run. Not right away. And maybe that mattered. He looked down at the ground, still wet with dew and soft from thaw. A single print remained where the creature had crouched, small, padded, unlike anything he'd seen before. He crouched and touched it, warm still. He stayed there until the fog began to lift, and light spilled over the river like a promise too soft to trust. Behind him, the town of Elk Hollow would be waking up soon. People opening shops, starting coffee, reading papers that didn't have space for things like this. He knew what he had to do next. And it wasn't tell anyone. Not yet. Something had called from those woods. And it hadn't been a warning. It had been a call to come back, to find what had been left behind, and to decide, once and for all, what kind of man he was going to be. When the forest asked again. The morning after was colder than it should have been. Spring had officially come to Elk Hollow, but the forest still held on to its breath, like it wasn't ready to trust the warmth just yet. Mark moved through the woods with a kind of quiet urgency, a flannel shirt thrown over his long johns, coat zipped only halfway, as if he'd left the cabin before reason could catch up to him. His boots crunched over old pine needles and thawed patches of earth. In his hands, a small red tin box packed with bandages, tweezers, and iodine. And in his pocket, 2 handfuls of huckleberries wrapped in cheesecloth. He didn't know if it would be there, but something deeper than logic kept pulling his steps forward. The place wasn't far from where he'd seen it. Buddy. He'd begun calling it in his head, though the name didn't come from language. It came from instinct, from how that little thing had looked at him before vanishing, like trust had cracked open just a little. Against all odds, he found the spot, same log, same hollow, empty. He crouched anyway, placed the berries on a flat stone, then unlatched the tin. He opened the gauze rolls slowly, like a ritual, then looked up to the trees. Nothing moved. Then something did. The air changed first, like a breath drawn just behind him. Not wind, not bird. Mark didn't turn. He kept his hands in view, steady. Behind him, a soft rustle. Then a pause. A second rustle, closer. He held out the berries, palm up. A moment passed. Then he heard it. The faintest sniff. He tilted his head slightly. The creature was back. Buddy stood behind a curtain of low branches, limping, eyes brighter than yesterday but rimmed with pain. Its fur was darker now, damp with morning mist. Blood had dried around its ankle where the wound split the skin. And still, it came closer. Not like an animal, like something trying to remember what safety felt like. Mark didn't speak. He didn't need to. He just slowly shifted, motioned to the moss beside him. The creature watched, then lowered itself slowly, carefully. It sat with its good leg tucked beneath and the injured one stretched out, trembling. It looked at him, then at the berries. It took one, placed it in its mouth, and chewed slowly. Then another. Mark reached for the tin. Buddy flinched. He stopped, waited, then showed the gauze, held up the bottle of iodine. The creature stared, as if measuring every thread of his intention. Then, with slow, tentative motion, it lifted its injured leg and offered it forward. Mark's throat tightened. He'd dressed wounds before, on deer tangled in fences, even once on a neighbor's dog after it got hit by a snowmobile. But this was different. This was something with eyes that asked questions. He cleaned the blood gently, wiping around the puncture, then leaned closer. Embedded in the flesh near the heel was a sliver of jagged steel. A trap. Not old. Still fresh, stained with blood and rust. He braced Buddy's leg, whispered something he didn't quite hear himself say, and pulled. The creature jolted, whimpered, but didn't lash out. He dropped the shard into his palm. It was a twisted piece of metal, notched at the end. Stamped on one side, barely visible under the grime, were 2 letters, G.W. Mark stared at it, breath catching. He knew those initials. Everyone in Elk Hollow did. His fingers closed around the metal. Buddy had curled into itself, holding the bandaged leg close. But then it looked up at him. Really looked. And then, it did something that made Mark forget how to breathe. It bowed its head, not like an animal, like a child. Then slowly, it raised one hand, thick and padded, and touched its chest. Then reached out and pressed the same hand to Mark's. A beat passed between them. A heartbeat, maybe. Then 2. Mark didn't move, didn't speak. He just let it happen. He'd spent years trying to make peace with silence. It had never been this easy. Not until now. The sun broke softly through the trees, throwing light in thin golden slats across the clearing. They sat like that for a while, two broken things trying to believe in something good again. Later that afternoon, back in town, Mark stood by the shelf behind the counter of the old pharmacy. The place smelled like eucalyptus and lemon oil, and always felt 5 degrees warmer than the street. Alice Harrow was arranging tincture bottles by color again, like always. Her hair was pinned back in a low bun, strands silvering around her temples. She had that look she always wore when she knew something before it was said. "You've been spending a lot of time downriver," she said casually, not turning around. Mark didn't answer. He picked up a box of gauze, studied it like it might save him. "You still don't sleep well, do you?" she added. He shrugged. Alice finally turned, drying her hands on a cloth. "You've seen it," she said softly, voice dropping into something gentler than curiosity. Mark froze. "I've heard them," she said. "Years ago. Out near Devil's Elbow. Saw a shadow once. Could have been anything, but I knew. Felt it in my gut." She paused, stepped closer. "Some things stay hidden because they know better, because the world isn't kind. But every once in a while they get desperate." Mark met her eyes. "Don't tell me," she said, touching his arm lightly. "Just listen. If something that rare chooses to trust you, that's not an accident. That's a gift." He swallowed. "Tuki Dieu songjuok la vie no biechonai jetin," she added, her voice dipping into the language her mother once taught her, back when she was still Alice Nguyen, before she ever became Harrow by marriage and by small-town habit. Mark left with gauze and antiseptic and nothing he didn't already know in his chest. Back in the woods, the fog returned by dusk, thinner now, as if the forest was watching him more clearly. Buddy met him again at the hollow. The wound looked better. Still swollen, still angry red, but clean. The creature had gathered leaves, built a sort of nest, ferns laid out in patterns, like someone had been trying to rebuild the idea of home. Mark helped it rewrap the bandage, tied the cloth snug, but not too tight. Buddy didn't flinch this time. Instead, it pointed to the metal shard Mark had pinned to a scrap of cloth. Mark unwrapped it. Buddy touched it, then looked into the trees. Its face changed. Fear. Memory. It had come from something bad. Mark's jaw clenched. He stood, stared out at the forest. Somewhere out there, someone had set that trap. Someone with a name. GW. He'd seen those initials before. Branded into the handles of old hunting knives, stamped into gearboxes, even burned into the wooden rifle rack behind the general store. Grayson Weller. Goddamn Grayson. Still setting steel traps even though the sheriff had warned him. Still hunting things he didn't understand. Mark looked down at Buddy, then back to the trees. This wasn't about evidence. Wasn't about getting someone in trouble. It was about choosing which secret to keep and which one to protect with everything he had left. He pocketed the metal shard. Buddy reached out again, touched his arm. This time, Mark placed his hand gently on the creature's head. He didn't speak. There were no words for this kind of promise. And as the fog thinned and the woods darkened, he knew exactly what kind of silence he'd signed himself into. One that didn't protect him anymore, but them, and he would keep it, even if it cost him everything. Because some miracles were never meant to be shared. They were meant to be kept safe. And that meant hiding them from the very world that would kill them just to name them. It started with the ferns. At first glance, just leaves, ordinary and scattered. But as the late afternoon light slanted through the trees and caught the edges of the green, Mark paused, bent down, looked closer. The arrangement wasn't random. Fronds curved into a crude oval. Small, layered piles of leaves nestled in the center. And right there, placed with care, a cluster of huckleberries, fresh, untouched. Not dropped, not spilled, offered. Something in the air shifted when he saw it. The kind of quiet that made your skin feel watched. He turned slowly, eyes trailing along the banks of the Clark Fork, just beyond the cluster of rocks where Buddy had last limped away into the trees. His boots made no sound as he stepped around the fern circle, unwilling to disturb what might be sacred. He scanned the soft soil around it. Small prints, padded, like Buddy's, but others too. Larger, heavier. He followed the signs. A branch broken low. A smear of moss disturbed along a slope. And there, beside a weathered cedar stump, fresh traps. New ones. Shiny steel teeth hidden beneath a dusting of pine needles and baited with dried meat. The kind used for wolf lines or old bear roots. Mark's breath turned colder than the air. He crouched beside one, lifted the wire that anchored it to a root, saw the way it gleamed, recently set, recently checked. His jaw tightened. This wasn't an old hunter cleaning out old stock. This was active, intentional. He stood and scanned the tree line, body still, heart loud. Nothing moved. But that feeling again, eyes, watching, not hostile, just searching. He turned back toward the hollow where Buddy had begun to heal. It was empty. But a trail, just faint enough to follow, led into the underbrush. Drops of something darker than mud stained a few scattered leaves. He followed them. The sun was lowering, dragging long shadows across the forest floor. Mark's pace quickened. He slipped once on damp moss, caught himself. The blood was drying by the time he found the next sign. A small print, deeper than the others, pressed hard into mud like the creature had stumbled. He broke into a jog, and then he heard it. A rustle, a yelp. Then nothing. He stopped, breath held, waited. Branches shifted ahead, and from the bramble, Buddy emerged. The little creature was panting. One hand clawed into the dirt, trying to drag itself forward. Its wounded leg gave out. It collapsed, chest rising and falling too fast. Eyes wild. Mark dropped to his knees, heart thudding. Hey, it's me," he whispered, voice barely above the sound of the wind. Buddy didn't move, just whimpered once, low in its throat. Then it curled into itself, shaking. Mark moved slowly, inching closer, hands out. When he reached its side, he placed a hand on its back, light, steady. No flinch, no fight. He slid his arms gently beneath it, cradling the weight, warm and trembling. He could feel the heart pounding through its fur. Too fast. "It's all right," he murmured, like he used to say to his daughter when she woke from night terrors. "You're safe now." Buddy didn't answer, but it didn't pull away either. Mark held the creature close, sitting back against the roots of a tree, letting its body rest against his chest. For a long moment, nothing else existed but the pulse of breath and the weight of trust. The woods dimmed. Somewhere far off, a crow called once. Then again, he looked up instinctively and froze. Across the clearing, half shadowed by distance and dusk, stood something massive. It hadn't made a sound. It stood perfectly still, covered in dense fur the color of wet bark, tall, taller than any man Mark had ever seen. Shoulders broad, legs rooted like trunks, arms long and slack at its sides. But it was the face that held him. Not monstrous, not beast, something sorrowful. The eyes met his, dark, unblinking, full of grief, and Mark understood instantly. This wasn't just a creature. This was a father. Buddy stirred in his arms. A soft sound escaped its throat, almost a word, almost a song. The figure in the distance shifted, its shoulders tensed. One step forward, then another, then it stopped. Mark didn't move, didn't dare breathe. He saw it then. The way its hands clenched, the way its chest heaved, the way its eyes never left the little form in his arms. It wasn't angry. It wasn't afraid. It was pleading. "Please, please keep it safe. Please help." The forest hushed, as if the trees themselves held their breath with him. Then, softly, the massive figure raised one hand, palm forward, a gesture not of power, but of hope, of surrender, of trust. And then, like mist unraveling at dawn, it stepped backward into the trees and disappeared. Mark sat in silence for a long time, his arms around the small, shivering body, his mind trying to catch up with what his heart had already decided. This wasn't about science, wasn't about discovery or proof. This was about something older. Older than fear, older than myth. A father had come to the edge of the human world and asked for help. And Mark, somehow, had been the one standing there when it mattered most. Buddy stirred again, pressing closer, the tremors finally slowing. Its fingers clutched the fabric of his jacket, holding on. The sun dropped lower. The woods deepened. But Mark didn't move, because now everything had changed, and he was no longer just a man walking beside a river. He was a keeper of something unspoken, a witness to something the world wasn't ready for. But the forest was. The forest always had been. He looked down at the creature breathing softly against his chest and whispered, "I won't let them find you." The words dissolved into the wind, carried somewhere deeper into the trees, where maybe, just maybe, someone else was still listening and waiting and hoping. The heat came too fast that year. By early June, the hills of Elk Hollow had shed their morning frost and dressed themselves in sun-cracked trails and dust that clung to boots and truck beds. What had been a quiet town of 800 swelled to nearly double each weekend, drawing in outsiders with fishing rods, hiking packs, and the kind of curiosity that made locals grit their teeth. Whispers had begun weeks earlier. Quiet at first, then louder, louder still. Strange prints near the creek. A girl in a campsite swearing she saw a shadow taller than a door frame, not bear, not elk. And then the rumor Mark couldn't stop from circling back to him. Something big, something wild, moving near the river bend below Pine Ridge. By the time Sheriff Waters pulled up to Mark's cabin, the dust from his tires hadn't even settled before the question came. "You been out there every morning, huh?" the sheriff asked, arms crossed over a badge dulled by sun and time. "Down by Clark Fork. Any particular reason?" Mark leaned against the door frame, arms tucked into his sides like the truth might fall out if he moved too much. His boots were still muddy from dawn. His eyes a little red. "Just chasing the light," he said. "You know how it is." Sheriff Waters gave a long, knowing look. Not hard, not accusing, but probing. He wasn't the kind of man who needed to speak every suspicion out loud to make it understood. He left with a nod, but Mark could feel the weight of unspoken things trailing behind the cruiser as it drove off. He waited until it was out of earshot before going inside. Locked the back door, checked the window again. Down by the river, hidden behind a thicket of scrub pine and stone, was a pocket of earth shaped like a crescent. Cool, damp, hidden. Buddy had taken to curling there most days now. Still limping, but healing. Still afraid, but less. Mark slipped down that trail in the early evening, the first stars beginning to blink out from behind thinning clouds. He carried a thermos and a new roll of gauze. The moment he reached the hollow, he whistled low. 2 tones, soft, then sharp. A signal he never taught Buddy, but one the creature had come to understand. The leaves rustled. Then Buddy appeared. He was taller now, or maybe just standing straighter. Still small, still too young to be alone, but his eyes no longer held the same raw panic. There was recognition there. Trust. Mark knelt, uncapped the thermos, poured warm broth into a metal camping cup, and waited. Buddy sat, took the cup between padded hands, sipped carefully. His hands were clumsier than a child's, but deliberate. And when he looked up at Mark with those deep, reflective eyes, he seemed more than just a creature. He seemed aware. That was what unsettled Mark most. Not fear, not the strangeness of it all, but the awareness, the way Buddy observed him, the way he mimicked. Like now, after sipping the broth, Buddy set the cup down, then bowed his head slightly. Just like Mark had done the night before. Then, slowly, he lifted one arm and touched his own chest. Mark swallowed. "You're learning me," he said, barely a whisper. Buddy tilted his head. Mark wanted to laugh, or cry, or both. Instead, he reached into his jacket and unwrapped the pouch of berries he'd picked earlier that day. He offered them without a word. Buddy took them one by one, chewing slowly, eyes scanning the trees every few seconds. Mark had started to notice it too. The woods didn't feel empty anymore. He used to come here for the quiet. Now the silence felt like something holding its breath. That night, long after Buddy had gone back to the shadows and Mark had hiked home with a new tightness in his chest, he stepped into the drugstore for more antiseptic and iodine. Alice was at the counter, sorting receipts. She didn't look up. "You're running low again." Mark placed the bottle of antiseptic on the counter. "You think I'm crazy?" he asked. Alice paused, looked at him. "I think you're doing what's right, even if you don't know what that is yet." He hesitated, then pulled something from his coat pocket. A thin steel fragment, crusted with old blood. "Found another one. Trap. Same initials." She took it, turned it over in her palm. The light caught the crude letters. G.W. "Grayson," she whispered. Mark nodded. "They're not just looking for legends anymore," he said. "Someone's hunting, and they know what they're doing." Alice exhaled slowly, then reached beneath the counter and pulled out a roll of clean gauze. "No receipt," she said. "You didn't get it here." Back in the woods the next morning, Mark crouched by the hollow. Buddy wasn't there. Panic rose sharp and instant in his throat. He whistled, once, twice. No movement. Then he heard it. A sound he couldn't place. Not footsteps, not branches. A voice, but not human. Somewhere between howl and hum. Deep, distant, layered with sorrow. Mark froze. And then another sound. Sharp, violent. A gunshot. The echo cracked through the trees like a slap. Mark bolted. The trail to the hollow blurred beneath his feet. He tore through low brush, heart slamming, eyes wide. The hiding place was empty. Leaves disturbed, moss darkened with something that wasn't due. And there, tracks. Small ones. Dragged. Mark dropped to his knees, hands in the dirt. "Buddy," he breathed. Then he stood, scanned the woods, and ran. He followed the signs, the bent grass, the broken twigs. He ran until his legs burned, until the light grew thin and the trees turned blue with dusk. He didn't find the creature. Not that night. But what he did find stopped him cold. A scrap of fabric, his own flannel, torn. A few feet away, blood. Too little to say fatal. Too much to ignore. He knelt, fingers trembling, picked up the cloth, then stood and stared into the darkening woods. Somewhere out there, someone had fired a gun, and Buddy was gone. Back in town, they'd talk about coyotes. They'd blame a deer gone mad. They'd laugh in the bar over beers and say the forest played tricks on people who went out too far alone. But Mark knew better. Something precious had slipped just out of reach, and it wasn't done yet. The forest was no longer just background. It was a breathing, watching thing. And tonight, it had lost something. So had he. And neither would be quiet for much longer. The woods no longer whispered. They groaned. They pressed inward. They pulsed with something wrong. Mark's legs burned as he ran, branches clawing at his sleeves, breath tight in his chest. The trees blurred past him, but his eyes never left the broken trail ahead. Faint drag marks in the loam, droplets of blood dark against fallen needles, a small handprint smeared across a slick root. He didn't call out. He didn't dare. Whatever had taken Buddy had left a trail too sloppy, too desperate, and too fresh to be smart. Something had gone wrong. The shot had come from the North Ridge. His gut told him to go west. His heart didn't care. He followed the blood. A downed pine slowed him. He climbed over it, hands scraping bark, then froze. The slope dropped steep into a ravine, choked with fern and bramble. It was quieter here. Too quiet. And then he saw the shape. Not small, massive, half-curled beneath a fallen log, chest heaving, one arm twisted awkwardly beneath its weight. The fur along its side was soaked with red, matted and thick. For one awful second, Mark thought it was dead. Then it moved, a twitch in the hand, a slow blink. Papa. Mark didn't know what else to call him. Not a beast, not a monster, but a father. Same as the one who'd looked at him weeks ago from across a clearing with eyes full of grief. The same one who'd raised a hand, not in warning, but in trust. He was bleeding out. Mark's breath caught. A few feet away, crouched beside the wounded figure, was Buddy. Pressed tight against him, making small, rhythmic sounds. Half whimper, half comfort, rocking slowly, protecting him. No one else was there. No shooter, no trap, just the aftermath. Mark dropped to his knees, slid down the slope, ignored the sting of brambles tearing his arm. His boots hit the soft ground hard. He was beside them now. Buddy looked up, eyes wide with recognition and fear. He didn't move away. Mark scanned the wound. The entry was high on the shoulder, clean through the muscle but deep. The blood came steady, bright. He pulled off his coat, tore the sleeve from his shirt beneath, pressed it to the wound. The giant groaned, low and broken, like a tree cracking in a winter storm. Mark spoke low, fast, but steady. "I've got you. You're not dying. Not today." He didn't know if the creature could understand him, but Buddy leaned forward, helped press down the cloth with small, shaking hands. Mark worked quickly, tightened the pressure, wrapped what he could. He had no morphine, no stitching thread, just trembling hands and adrenaline. The giant's breathing hitched, then leveled, still fast, but not ragged. The forest around them stayed still, too still. Mark's ears strained. Nothing. He didn't know how long they had. He pulled out his pocket knife, cut the hem of his undershirt, wrapped the rest of the wound, tied it down as best he could. His fingers were slick with blood. His heart was louder than his thoughts. He looked at Buddy. "We need to move him." Buddy blinked, then looked to the trees. "No time," Mark said. "If they're still close." A crack echoed in the distance. Not a gunshot, a branch. He grabbed Buddy, pulled him back, then reached for the giant's good arm. "Come on," he whispered. "Help me." It was impossible. The body was massive, solid muscle and weight. But together, Mark pulling, Buddy pushing, they dragged him inch by inch into the thickest part of the underbrush. A tangle of pine and fallen rock. Mark collapsed beside him, breath ragged, chest heaving. He scanned the forest. Still no movement. The light was fading. They didn't have much time. He looked at Papa's face, so human in the pain. The brow furrowed, the lips slightly parted, the eyes closed but not at rest. The breath shallow, but still there. Buddy curled beside him, one hand still gripping his fur. Protective. Mark crouched, touched Buddy's shoulder. It flinched, then settled. Buddy looked at him. No sound, just a look. Mark nodded. He sat down on the forest floor, beside the father and child, heart pounding. For a moment, there was nothing else in the world but 3 lives breathing together, hidden beneath pine and dirt and fear. Later, minutes or hours, he couldn't tell. He heard it. Another voice. Distant, not human. Low, like thunder moving through stone. Not calling, mourning. Buddy sat up. Mark did too. The sound came again. Closer this time. It filled the forest. Not loud, but deep. Like it belonged there. Like the wind made room for it. Mark's chest tightened. He'd heard that voice once before. The night by the river. It had come from deeper in the woods. Calling. Searching. He turned to Buddy. The creature was standing now, unsteady but alert. Its ears perked. Its eyes focused. The voice called again. A response this time. Buddy's own voice, soft and rough. Something between a chirp and a moan. Papa stirred. Mark reached instinctively, steadied him. The giant blinked, pain pulling his features tight. Then, slowly, he turned his head, looked at Mark. For the first time, they locked eyes. And in that second, something passed between them. Recognition, not of form, not of species, but of role, of what had just happened. Mark had shielded them. He had pulled the father of the forest into hiding, bled on the ground for him, risked everything. And Papa saw that. His hand twitched. Not to strike. To reach! It rested slowly on Mark's wrist. Heavy, warm, real. Mark didn't move, didn't breathe. Then the hand released, and the giant closed his eyes again. From deeper in the trees, the voice came once more. This time it was closer, richer, and followed by the soft crunch of leaves. Mark stood. Buddy stood beside him. They turned together. Something was coming. Not violence. Something older, and it was almost here. The moment stretched thin between breaths. The wounded father lay curled beneath the pine boughs, one massive arm slack across his chest, blood drying black at the seams of Mark's makeshift bandage. Beside him, Buddy stayed close, guarding the silence. Neither had moved in minutes, but the forest wasn't still. It was listening. Mark crouched low, heart pounding too close to his ribs. The call had come again, the same low hum like wind curling through hollow bones. It wasn't human. It wasn't language. But it meant something. He stood, careful not to rustle the brush shielding their makeshift hiding place. His hands were still tacky with blood, dirt clinging to his knuckles. The light was fading fast, turning every shadow into something that could be mistaken for a threat. And in the corner of his mind, one name pulsed beneath every thought: Sheriff Waters. He hadn't told him everything. He hadn't told anyone. The line had been crossed the moment he'd pulled Papa's bleeding body into cover, and there was no going back. A twig snapped to the east. Mark flinched. Not a hunter's pace, no boots. The sound was soft, deliberate, measured. He turned slowly and saw the brush shift, then part. A shape stepped through, tall, lean, uniformed. Waters. Mark froze. The sheriff held up both hands, not reaching for his weapon. His eyes scanned the scene behind Mark, caught the motionless body. The child crouched close and stopped. "What the hell?" Waters murmured, barely audible. Mark stepped between him and the others, chest tight, feet dug into the dirt. "You need to stop right there." Waters didn't move. His jaw clenched once. Then he looked at Mark, not like an officer to a suspect, not like a friend to a friend, but like a man standing in front of something he'd spent his life denying. "I've been getting calls," he said quietly. "People saying they heard things, saw prints, gunshots out past the ridge, traps set where none should be. I come out here to check on you, and now, this?" Mark didn't answer. Waters glanced down at the blood on Mark's arms. "You protecting it?" Mark nodded once. Waters studied him. "You told me once," he said slowly. "You kept dreaming about the lake, about that winter, about how fast it cracked." Mark swallowed hard. The forest went still again. "You never forgave yourself," Waters continued, voice lower now. "Not for not getting to her in time, not for the silence afterward." Mark's throat closed. "This isn't about making up for anything," he said. Waters gave a long look. "Yes, it is." Mark didn't reply. Behind him, Buddy shifted closer to Papa, placing one hand gently on his father's ribs. The gesture wasn't childish. It was deliberate, protective. The sheriff saw it. His jaw twitched. "They're not monsters," Mark said finally. "Not even close." Waters exhaled. And then, through the thickening dusk, a sound rose behind them. Another voice. Female. Not human. Deeper, fuller, wrapped in something older than language. Mark turned. His blood turned cold. The trees parted, and she stepped forward. She was taller than Papa, covered in fur as dark as river mud, streaked with graying silver along the arms and chest. Her shoulders rippled with strength, but it was her face that stilled everything. It wasn't a snarl. It wasn't rage. It was pain, worry. She saw Papa first, her steps slowing, breath hitching. Then she saw Buddy, then Mark, and finally, Waters. She didn't run. She didn't roar. She stood her ground. Mark raised his hands slowly, no words, just presence. Buddy rose and took a tentative step toward her. She dropped to one knee, arms open. The sound she made next cracked something in the center of Mark's chest. It was raw, like grief meeting hope, like a heart relearning its shape. Buddy ran to her, clung to her, and still her eyes stayed fixed on Papa. She moved past Mark, past Waters, stepped over roots and stone, knelt beside the broken body of her mate. She touched his face, then his side, then placed both her palms flat on the earth beside him. And for one long moment, she stayed like that. Mark didn't move. Neither did Waters. The forest held its breath, and Papa stirred. His eyes blinked open, clouded, tired. But there, she let out a sound, a tremble of sound low and warm and full of relief. Papa reached for her hand. Their fingers touched. Mark turned away, unable to watch more. Behind him, the sheriff stepped forward. This can't stay hidden," he said under his breath. Mark looked at him. "Yes, it can." Waters hesitated. "You think they'll be safe if people find out?" Mark said. "You think a town like Elk Hollow's gonna understand this? Gonna protect this?" The silence between them thickened. "They've survived this long because they stayed out of sight. Because they knew better than to trust us." Waters didn't argue. But he didn't nod either. "I didn't come out here to arrest you," he said finally. "I came to find out what was worth risking everything for." Mark glanced back toward the clearing. The family huddled together now. Papa sitting up with effort. Buddy curled close, the mother wrapping both in her arms. "This," Mark said softly. The air shifted again. Waters turned to leave but paused. "Are we sure," he said, "that we're the ones keeping them safe? Or are they the ones sparing us from what we might become?" Mark didn't answer. He didn't need to. The sheriff disappeared into the trees. Night crept in. The clearing emptied. Mark stood alone, heart still full of movement, ears ringing with the last echoes of a call that didn't belong to any man, yet felt closer to truth than anything he'd ever heard. And somewhere far behind the dark curtain of branches, he knew something had shifted. Not just between worlds, but inside himself. Because once you've stood between the hunted and the hunter, between the known and the impossible, there's no going back to silence. There's only learning how to carry it, and how to protect what should never be explained. The wind had turned by morning. Cooler now, laced with the scent of ash and something older. Earth overturned, pine needles trampled, something bleeding into the soil that didn't belong there. Mark walked alone through the narrowing trail, his boots nearly silent over damp ground, eyes scanning for movement that no longer wanted to be seen. The forest hadn't been the same since the mother came. She was still out there. He felt her the way you feel a storm before the clouds arrive. Heavy in the chest, low in the spine. Something watching but not judging. Something waiting. The sun had just broken the ridge behind Elk Hollow when the first shot rang out. Mark stopped mid-step. It came from the eastern slope, too close. Another crack, then shouting, then the thunder of boots over dry leaves. Hunters. He turned and ran. Branches tore at his arms. A branch whipped across his cheek and split skin. He didn't care. He cleared the ridge fast, slid down the far slope on loose gravel. The river was roaring louder today, swollen from snowmelt, churning along its banks like it wanted to carry secrets downstream. And there, just below the bend, the clearing opened like a wound. 3 figures stood with rifles, all pointed in the same direction. One was Grayson Weller. The others Mark didn't recognize. Friends or fools. It didn't matter. What mattered was the barrel trained toward the hollow, toward her. Mama stood in full view now, just past the edge of the trees, towering, motionless, fur stirred by wind. Her eyes, human, almost unbearable, fixed not on the guns, but on Buddy. Buddy had stepped forward, alone, arms slightly raised. No threat in him, only urgency. Between them, his father still weak but upright, half hidden behind scrub. Blood dried along his flank. A family exposed, outnumbered, but not retreating. Mark broke through the underbrush just as one of the men lifted his scope. "Don't!" Mark shouted. "Too late," the man fired. The bullet hit the ground 3 feet from Buddy's feet, spraying soil and rock. Buddy screamed. It was not a sound that belonged to any animal. It sounded like fear collapsing into grief. The mother roared, not rage, not warning, but the kind of sound that made everything stop. Even the river, even the birds, even time. She moved fast, not toward the hunters, but in front of her son. She didn't attack. She shielded. Her body, massive, stood as a wall between the rifles and the child. She didn't raise her fists. She didn't growl. She just stood there, breathing, bleeding slightly at the shoulder, an old wound reopened. eyes wide, locked on Mark. Mark stepped between them all. "No more guns!" he shouted. Grayson laughed once. "You've lost it, Avery." "I said no more," Mark growled, stepping into the open, arms out. "You shoot again and you better aim for me first." Grayson raised his weapon again, but one of the others, taller, younger, grabbed his arm. "Look," the man whispered, nodding toward the boy. Buddy was walking again, not running, not hiding, walking straight toward Mark. Mark knelt low, arms open. Buddy didn't pause. He ran into Mark's chest, buried his face against his neck. The world narrowed. The guns lowered. Behind them, the mother let out a sound too soft to name. Mark looked up at her. Her eyes shimmered. Then, slowly, she stepped forward. One massive hand reached out. She didn't touch Buddy. She didn't touch her mate. She touched Mark. Her palm pressed gently to his chest, just over his heart. Mark didn't flinch. He stayed there. Still, let her feel it beating. Let her decide what kind of man he was. She closed her eyes, just for a second. And when they opened again, they looked older. Not sad, just complete. She turned back to Papa, helped him rise. Her strength quiet but unbreakable. Together the family moved toward the trees. Mark stayed kneeling, Buddy still wrapped around him. He didn't cry, but something shifted. Something left him. Grayson didn't follow. No one did. The guns stayed down, and when the Bigfoot family disappeared into the shadows again, nothing dared chase them. Buddy pulled back slightly, looking up. He touched Mark's face, one finger, light as breath, tracing the cut on his cheek. Then he turned, walked to his mother. She waited, held out her hand. He took it. They walked away together, not rushed, not afraid, just done. Mark stayed until the wind died, until the birds returned, until he was alone again. Behind him, Grayson muttered something and spat. But he didn't speak to Mark. He didn't look him in the eye. He walked off with his rifle slung low, footsteps heavy. The others followed, heads down. Mark remained kneeling, the place where the mother had touched him still warm. He looked at the dirt where Buddy had stood. A single print remained, deep, real, and utterly impossible. He reached out, touched it, then rose. The forest didn't speak, but something in it had changed, and it would never be the same again, not for him. Not for Elk Hollow, not for whatever lived just past the reach of fear, and just beneath the surface of belief. The river was quiet now. Winter had returned like a long breath drawn in and held close, cloaking the valley in soft white hush. Snow clung to the trunks of cedar and fir like old memories. Ice veiled the shallows, thin and glass-like. And on the ridge above Clark Fork, Mark stood alone, wrapped in a thick canvas coat, camera bag slung over one shoulder, boots sunk into cold earth that remembered everything. He hadn't come to chase light this time. He'd come to remember. The sky was clear, the air sharp. Breath curled from his mouth and vanished. Below, the water ran steady beneath its skin of frost, carrying the same sounds he'd once followed all the way to a whimper in the fog. A sound that had changed him. He reached into his bag and pulled out the last roll of film. The real one, the one he hadn't burned. He'd held on to it like a question, like guilt, like maybe someday someone else would need proof. But he knew now, some truths weren't meant to be proven. He lifted the roll, turned it in his fingers. Each frame inside held something that didn't belong in the world men had built. A creature crouched in pain. A child offering trust. A family bleeding quietly into the moss without asking to be named. He lowered his hand, looked out across the water, and said nothing. In the distance, the forest murmured. Not words, but memory. Downstream, somewhere beneath a thick bend of pine, was the hollow. The place where he'd first bandaged Buddy's leg. Where he'd stood in front of the sheriff and lied because it was the only way to protect something real. He could still see it in his mind. Every bend of the ferns, every shape of the prints in the dirt. The weight of a body leaning on his arm. The sound of breath slowing. The moment when silence became language. He let out a breath, tired, clear. And then, slowly, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the wooden box. It was small, Handmade, hinged with brass, worn smooth from weeks of turning it in his hands late at night when sleep wouldn't come. He opened it. Inside, 3 things. The film roll, a strip of gauze, blood-stained, faded now to brown, and a small, flat rock, smooth on one side, the color of river stone, and on the surface, pressed deep into the dry mud before it had hardened, was a print. A child's hand, not human, not animal, but real. He ran a finger over the print. His throat caught. The day he found it, the rock had been placed carefully on the edge of the water, as if waiting for someone to notice. No other tracks around it, just that palm, pressed into clay like a farewell, like a thank you. He closed the lid, latched it, and buried the box beneath a cairn of stones at the base of a young spruce. No words, no ceremony, just a promise to the forest, to the family that had trusted him, to the boy who had reached out in fear and never pulled away. He brushed snow over the stones, covered the mound until it looked like any other break in the trail. Then he stood, listened. Stillness, peaceful, not empty. He turned and walked slowly back along the trail, each step lighter than the last, each step carrying something he didn't need to hold anymore. By the time he reached the cabin, dusk had settled. The mountains behind Elk Hollow burned gold for a moment, then fell into blue. He stepped onto the porch. Sheriff Waters was already waiting. No uniform, just a flannel and worn boots, a thermos in one hand. He nodded once. Mark nodded back. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Waters held out the thermos. Coffee. Mark took it, warmed his hands. "You still keeping it quiet?" Waters asked after a minute. Mark nodded. "They're gone." Waters looked down at the steps. "You sure?" Mark looked toward the trees. "No." Waters let out a soft laugh. "That little one, he had eyes, like he knew more than most folks in town." Mark didn't answer. Waters stood. "You did the right thing." Mark didn't look at him, just said, "Not everything's meant to be caught." Waters nodded. "No, but it's still real." The sheriff left not long after. Mark watched the tail lights disappear down the road, snow crunching under the tires. He stepped inside, lit the stove, set the kettle, and while it boiled, he took one last look at the wall above his desk. Empty. No photos. No frames. No fame. Just memory. And something else. He opened the drawer, pulled out his journal, flipped to the last page. He didn't write a name. Didn't sketch a face. Just 4 words. They're still out there. He closed it, placed it gently back in the drawer, turned off the lamp. Outside, the wind picked up. Somewhere in the distance, a single knock echoed through the woods. 1. Then silence. Not a threat. Not a warning. Just a hello. Just a reminder. And in that moment, Mark Avery smiled. He didn't need to turn around to know what it meant. Some miracles weren't meant to be owned. They were meant to be protected and remembered and left wild. Always. There are places in this world that don't belong on maps. Places where silence speaks louder than words, where the trees remember things we've long forgotten, and the wind carries more than just the scent of rain. In those quiet corners of the earth, something ancient still breathes, untouched, unseen, and deeply alive. Not everything that matters wants to be known. Some truths live in the spaces between fear and compassion, between instinct and choice. They exist not to be captured, but to be witnessed, to be held gently in the hearts of those who are willing to listen. Sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do is protect something we'll never fully understand. To keep a secret not for the sake of hiding, but for the sake of preserving the sacred. Because the world doesn't need more proof. It needs more people brave enough to choose kindness over curiosity, empathy over control. When we decide not to interfere with something beautiful just because we can, that's when we truly honor it. And maybe that's the lesson we forget most often in our rush to label, to explain, to possess. That love, real love, isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet act of staying when you could leave, of keeping something safe when the world would rather put it on display, of believing in something without needing to own it. The most extraordinary wonders don't demand attention. They ask for respect. And if you're lucky enough to cross paths with one, don't chase it. Don't call it out of hiding. Just meet it where it is and carry it forward in silence, like a lantern held close on a long, dark path. Thank you for taking this journey with us, one of wonder, of heart, and of mystery. If this story stirred something in you, we'd love to hear it. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let us know what you felt, what you saw, what stayed with you. And if you believe in the quiet magic of the forest, consider subscribing to the channel and joining our growing community. There are more stories waiting in the trees, and we'd be honored to share them with you.